Hey everybody, thanks for joining us for our Cisco internal training webinar for Cisco HyperFlex with Nexenta software-based NFS and SMB file services. Just a quick note before we get started here. All your lines are muted right now, so we won't be able to hear you, but there is a chat function on our GoToWebinar panel. So if you have any questions at all during the presentation, please go ahead and ask us questions there. We are going to be recording this webinar today, so shortly following the webinar, you will receive an email from us with the recording, the slides, a couple of resources for you, so you guys can have that in your hands and share it. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers. Today we have Ricardo, our VP of our Cisco Alliance, and we have Oscar, VP of Product Management. We're going to get started with Ricardo, and then Oscar is going to give us a demo.
Thank you, Sarah. Ricardo here speaking. I manage our alliances at Nexenta and specifically focus on building up the business with the Cisco team. So thank you for joining today. As Sarah touched, I'm going to do a quick overview of our solution and how it plays with HyperFlex, and then we're going to get to the important part of this session today with a product demo, and Oscar will lead that. Oscar, you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. Thank you, Ricardo. So my name is Oscar Wahlberg. I run product management for Nexenta today. And today, as Ricardo said, I'll help out and show you a quick demo as soon as we've gone through the overall solution.
Yeah. As Sarah stated, feel free to post questions. We'll address them as we go along. So we're in the next slide. Thank you. So it goes without saying, right? And we're here not to try to tell you about the goodness of hyperconverged infrastructure, right? With the amazing product you guys have and you're building up and offering to your customers, right? And customers love it because of all these good reasons, right? Primarily simplifying management, right? And people have been a little bit tired of the managing many silos of compute and storage, et cetera, right? And looking at HCI as a way of simplifying their lives, simplifying their data centers and the management of it, and be able to scale and be able to provide the services to their end customers, right? So what we have noticed and we believe have created an interesting opportunity that leads to this engagement with Cisco and the partnership is that in that mindset, in that philosophy, or even religion, if you want to call it, of moving to HCI, when there's a need for file storage, NFS or SMB, people are still going outside the HCI platform and buying another system. And we believe that that's not why people are embracing hyperconverged technologies. So with that said, we have worked with your product organization on building up a specific software-only solution to address the needs for file in HyperFlex clusters. So moving to the next slide, quickly, we call it NexentaStor VSA, Virtual Storage Appliance, primarily focused on providing file services exclusively for this solution. How does it work at a high level? We run a virtual machine on top of the VMware ESX hypervisor, consuming storage from the HyperFlex cluster, and we present on the front end capabilities to address that storage environment through the NFS protocol or the CIFS SMB protocol. For additional simplification, right, we have developed for the management of that environment, right, a vCenter plugin So that can be also, integrated into how the customers may want to manage the complete environment. I understand HyperFlex also has a vCenter plugin for that. For more detail, and configuration and information analytics, we provide a user interface that we refer to as Nexenta Fusion. So when you hear Nexenta Fusion, it's the management layer for the VSA. The solution has, complete SMB and NFS protocols capability, and we also provide something that is quite unique, which is high availability. Be able to fail over, clusters and make sure that, when something goes wrong, users don't lose access to their data. You usually get, on the SMB part of the protocol, what are the capabilities that we offer, right? And we are SMB2 and SMB3 compatible solution. We have the Active Directory integrations. We can support quotas by user. We have the ability to also support antivirus for scanning, the file shares and preventing any other security threats from that point of view. Our solution is not based on Samba. Many of you might have been familiar with this and potentially a way of how customers have been addressing this need. But Samba has a lot of set of other issues with regards to performance, scalability, management, right? Many cases, people don't want to be learning how to deal with a Linux server providing Samba access. We support, obviously, Windows clients and also Mac clients. And we have, thousands of customers who are doing this today, leveraging our file capabilities to enable Windows and Mac clients access to file services. Next slide. Thank you, Sarah. So again, at a high level of architecture, you manage, we run as a virtual machine on the HyperFlex, consuming VMDKs. Our solution has, typical storage data management capabilities that you expect on an enterprise storage product, including replication, including synchronization. We include features that are not needed in this case as data protection and compression, which we turn off and enable a HyperFlex to control and manage that aspects of the data management. We provide, as I mentioned, two ways of managing and providing access to manage the cluster, right? The solutions through the vCenter plugin and also through our Nexenta Fusion. Last but not least, we have the capabilities to replicate to another instance running in a public cloud. We provide this technology also to running on AWS, and some customers may have that need and requirement. I think it's a good piece of information to have handy, as many customers may want to do replication for backup, data protection, DR needs to a public instance somewhere else. Next slide. The most common use case, and the Cisco HyperFlex product team has initially focused us on what they believe is the most common use case for HyperFlex and where there's a need for file, and that's obviously virtual desktop infrastructure, VDI. So getting more specific on the functionality and how we address the needs there, right? There's two aspects of VDI that usually need file, specifically SMB, right? And usually that's the home directories, right? Where for compliance policies, data protection policies, etc., companies may prefer to centralize the files from the users into a central location, right? And that's what obviously we refer to home directories. In that case, all the functionality that I touched earlier becomes very handy, right? The ability to control who has access to what, right, through Active Directory, be able to allocate quotas by users, right? The idea that you could do versioning of the files, right? And that's a feature that is quite unique on NexentaStor and how we operate and how we do things. But the other area of need for file is the user profiles, right? And that's where, in usual, typical VDI scenarios, the infrastructure will try to identify what does the environment look like for user A versus user B, or maybe for a group of users, et cetera, when they log into the VDI environment, right? And that's leveraging the Windows user profiles, and that requires the SMB access, right, in the storage layer. So those are the two things that we have already, easily configured and provided as a capability, and usually, are the biggest questions we hear on VDI scenarios. Beyond that, our solution also has as I mentioned, high availability and be able to provide, a recovery time options, recovery time objectives of a few seconds in case one of the instances on the storage fails, and will provide users to transparently don't even realize that something went wrong and continue to have access to their files. Beyond that, we also provide analytics of the storage consumption and be able to provide information that becomes useful as who's using what, how they're using their quota, are they running out of space, what shares are being used the most, is there a bad behaving actor consuming lots of the resources on the storage, et cetera, et cetera. So all those things are also available through our Nexenta Fusion interface. Next slide. We started with this a few months ago, working with Cisco HyperFlex, your product team and your field team. We already have a customer, an insurance brokerage company called Lockton, a big customer for HyperFlex. It is our understanding at this point in time they have 30 nodes of HyperFlex. They fit the profile of what we had just described. The looking for the simplification, of their environment with the hyperconverge, and making sure that they can keep that simplicity even when they file to their environment, and they using NexentaStor VSA on top of HyperFlex to be able to provide file access to their solution. In this particular case, it's just, I'm going to call it, filer type capabilities, home directories, et cetera, not necessarily attached to a VDI use case, right? So it's kind of interesting that the solution is flexible enough to address different types of file requirements in the environment. Okay. We're going to get into the details of how to use this, and I think that's the part you guys care the most. But we're trying to make this very easy, right? Our objective is to make sure you know that this exists. Nexenta is a trusted Cisco partner. We have been working with your HyperFlex product organization to make this possible and available. But we're going to challenge you to get your hands on the solution, right? We are going to make software available to you. We're trying to make it easy. So you just need to download an OBS file that will give you a very simple wizard to determine configurations and use this thing. And Oscar's going to go through all these details. We're going to provide you license keys available to you, so you can have this environment available for you to do demos to your customers as you're presenting HyperFlex to them, and enable you to have an answer, right? We find in general that you're probably competing with people who have this solution in some shape or form integrated, and or the most common competitor is running a Windows server and provide SMB access, right? With all the challenges that has. But we believe this is a better solution. It's fully complementary to your HyperFlex go-to-market and product strategy, and will also enable to address the important aspect of your customer needs, while at the same time selling more HyperFlex. So with that said, I'll pass it to Oscar.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Okay. Let's see if we can get sharing sorted out here. So my goal today is basically to give you a quick overview of how we install things, and how the installation process works, as well as give you some high-level information of kind of how you can manage the solution, both through our vCenter plugin, but also through the Nexenta Fusion GUI, if a customer wants more detailed analytics, for example. So as you can see, and I'm sure you are all familiar with this, is a view of vCenter. And really, we've focused our installation procedures through vCenter to try to make it as easy as possible. And we're using, as Ricardo kind of provided the link, we're using an OVA or OVF to do that. So to deploy the NexentaStor VSA, you simply, click and deploy a OVF template. Now, the link that Ricardo provided is an external server that's available to everybody, us included. I'm going to use an internal server here in my lab environment because it's simply quicker. So that's why there's a different URL here, but that's the only reason. So I provide the URL, or I could provide a local file if you've downloaded this locally, if you're behind firewalls that don't allow internet access, for example. So provide the URL, I click next, and this is kind of where the wizard starts. You provide a virtual machine name. I'm just going to accept the default here. And I also provide a location within my data center, or which ESX server and so forth that I want to install this VSA on. My lab environment is pretty small. I only have one ESX server, so I'm just going to install it on that. And then you get some high-level details of what's going to happen and what the actual VSA is. It tells you the version of the VSA. It's a 5.2.1 right now. It tells you roughly the download size for the VSA. And this is really what's going to get downloaded, the VMDK that you need to download from Nexenta, or if you provide local storage, what we're going to do. Now, down there, it says that it's going to use 2 terabytes of storage. That depends a bit on the next set of steps that we go through. So you'll see that as we get into the configuration phase here. The next question that we get is really what size of the configuration or the deployment that we're going to use. We've configured 3 default settings here: small, medium, and large. That's really to try to address some of the key use cases for VDI deployments. Now, you can change these after deployment if you feel that you need to and you know better. These are just some defaults that we felt was reasonable for various sizes of deployments. And in the collateral that we've made available to the teams, you can see where we spec these for number of VDI desktops and so forth. So the small version is really a very small VDI deployment. It's 2 terabytes of data across 4 drives. It's a single vCPU. It's 8 gigs of RAM, so it's not very big. Medium moves up a bit more. It's 2 vCPUs, 24 gigs of RAM, and now it's 8 terabytes of, 8 terabytes of data drives. Large increases memory and increases the data drives. I'm actually going to go back and I'm going to deploy a small configuration here because that's more suitable for my use case here as a demo. So if I click next, the next is basically going to be, tell me where in your environment you're going to want to store this virtual machine. And again, this is standard VMware fare, right? So I'm just going to pick my local storage. I'm going to click next, and then you're going to get to select the networks. And we have 2 different network cards. You can see a management network, and you have a data network. These network cards can be assigned to the same network in your vCenter or vSphere server, or it could be different like it is in my case. I generally put my management networks on one network card and a separate network segment, and I put all my data traffic on my 10 gig E card. That's a different physical card. So once I've selected that, I move forward, and you get the chance to actually specify the size of the data drives if you want to change these. If you, for example, know that you need more than the 2 terabytes that I'm asking for here, right? And that's exactly what I'm going to do here, but because it's a demo and my environment is pretty small and I don't have a lot of disk, I'm actually going to make these disks really small rather than make them big. So when I click next here, I'm going to get asked to confirm all the different settings we've chosen. It basically tells you that I'm now going to provide or provision an NexentaStor VSA with a number of different settings. And you're going to see the storage mappings, you're going to see the network mappings, etc. And then as soon as I click finish here, vCenter is going to go out and start downloading the OVA from the internet. And in this case, from my lab server. And you can see this down here. If actually enlarged this a bit. You can see clearly. The first step when we started the wizard was it's importing the OVF package, and now it's going to start deploying the OVF package. Now, both of these processes, it's going to take a bit of time because we now need to download those 4 gigabytes of data, create the local VMDK, and so forth. But that's really how easy it is to deploy a new VSA. And once this is up and running, all you need to do is log in. You need to provide the license, and you need to create a pool. And after that, you have a running system that you can share files from. What I'm going to do in the interest of time right now is that I'm actually going to skip waiting for this. And I'm going to move over to an already provisioned VSA. And in my case, it's actually a clustered system. So I have 2 servers that are, or 2 VMs or VSAs that are already provisioned here that are called NS1 and NS2. These are running NexentaStor VSA as a cluster. And I'm going to move over and show you our vCenter plugin. So if you click on Home, you go to vCenter, you're going to see a NexentaStor vCenter plugin if you have that installed, which I do. And that's going to give you a list of all the appliances or the vCenter, or sorry, the NexentaStor appliances that are configured in this vCenter plugin. Now I have 2 here. This NStore-1 is a physical server, so it's external from the VM environment. I can still configure and administrate it actually directly from vCenter if I want to. Now this cluster here that says Tintry cluster, that is the one that consists of the 2 VMs called NS1 and NS2. When I clicked on this, you can see that I get a high-level summary of the 2 systems. NS1 here on the left-hand side, and NS2 here on the right-hand side. And those are summaries of how those individual nodes are working. In the middle, you have the total capacity, utilization, and so forth. I have very little data used on this server configuration. I basically have a very small server configuration, as you can see as well. I only have 19 gigabytes, or actually 4 times 5 gigabytes. That's the total size of my storage in this demo environment. But this is all assigned to what we call a pool, which is basically an allocation of all the storage we have available. And that pool I call tank, which is kind of a moinker for just, here's all that you have. So if I want to share a file system, it's as simple as I go into configure, I want to share a NAS file system, a NAS file system being either SMB for Windows shares or NFS for Unix style shares, right? I click create, and it says create file system, loading up the available pools. I get to name my file system, so maybe we'll go with Cisco to be simple. And if I had multiple pools here, I could pick which one I want to use, but I only have one, so we're picking tank here. I get to pick, obviously, do I want to share this through NFS, or do I want to share it through SMB? There's some additional configuration you can do for share properties for NFS. For SMB, that's all controlled with properties directly on the SMB share, so you can control access there. So you can accept the defaults here, and that's really all you need to do. You can also obviously set things like quotas or capacity limits, so that maybe you don't want anybody to use more than, I don't know, say, 5 gigs in this share. That's easy enough to do. And then we click create. And in the background, what we do is essentially we go out to our VSA, we create a local file system on that VSA, and we share that through SMB. So as you can see right now, we have a new file system called Cisco. 5 gigs available. The quota set is 5 gigs. It is shared through NFS, or sorry, through SMB. It's not shared through NFS. So really, at this point, you could go to a Windows machine and mount this share and start using it. It's really that simple. You can also set SMB properties. If you go down here, you can take a snapshot of the file system. We can do an unlimited number of snapshots per file system and kind of control that. You can also start what we call protection services, which are really a way to do regular scheduled snapshots. Maybe you want to do a snapshot every hour and have a rolling kind of schedule of that every hour, and then next day you just start taking new snapshots for that day, so that you can always back out if some users do something stupid, right? So that's what we call protection services. You can easily configure this through here as well. We have something that we call continuous replication as well, which allows you to do replication from this cluster to another cluster at a remote destination, for example. So all this can be managed directly through vCenter. You can even go into the left-hand column here and go to access controls. And that allows you to actually delegate permissions based on VMware users and permissions, so that if you want to provide certain capabilities to a VMware user, but not admin rights, you can actually control that. So you could have a VMware user that isn't really allowed to do all the configuration, but he can create and share file systems. You can control that from here. So all of that makes it for a very kind of integrated solution into the vCenter and the VMware ecosystem, right? And makes the basic functionality very, very easily accessible. Now, we obviously also have a CLI that's available on the individual VSAs that you can log into, either through the console or through SSH. And if you need deeper analytics and additional configuration options, we also have something that we call Nexenta Fusion. And this is our web administration GUI. That allows for a lot more deeper integration. It allows for long-term analytics of all the type of information that we collect. It's not mandatory to use, but it brings a lot of other capabilities. If I go in and look at this Tintri cluster, for example, you can see this first dashboard kind of provides an overview of the whole system, the health of the system. It gives me some high-level alerts if I have that, and you can see that I've already used, in certain cases, I've had CPU alerts saying that this system is heavily loaded, even though it's probably not heavily loaded right now. If you scroll down here, and you can see current CPU utilization over the last 6 hours, not very high at all. So you can also see status on the amount of space used. If you have current shares sharing out data, you can actually see the number of operations per second, the latency for those operations, and so forth on those shares right here under the NAS IO performance part. So it gives you a good sense for, how is the system performing. You can manage it as well. You can create new file systems. You can create shares. You actually create what we call volumes, and you can share those as block volumes as well. You can look at data protection settings. Again, this comes down to being the scheduled snapshot type stuff. And you can look at clustering status. These two nodes that I'm demonstrating on right now, they're actually, right now they're not a cluster, but it gives you some high-level information, right? As well as if this is a physical configuration, you could see more details on the physical components involved in the cluster. So you have NS1 here, you have NS2 here, and this is basically just going to give me some information on, what the system looks like. Now, you can also, in these dashboards, you can create your custom dashboards if you don't like the defaults that we provide. So we have a lot of pre-configured widgets that you can basically, design your own dashboard and say, if I only focus on that CPU utilization, for example, that'd be easy to build a new dashboard for that. You have support status. You can actually manage and upload support case logs to us if you need that, for example. That can be easily done from here as well. So a lot of these type of deeper integration is directly available through the Nexenta Fusion integration. But all the basic stuff of managing day-to-day operations for VDI deployments are directly available through the vCenter plugin if we switch back to that. So with that, I wanted to kind of quickly conclude the demo, and I wanted to give you guys a chance to ask questions. Sarah said earlier on that if you have questions, please put them in the chat window, and we're happy to answer any type of questions you have.
Yeah, it looks like we have a number of questions, and right before we get to those, I want to run through some things really quickly with you guys. Let's see here.
Okay.
So we have a number of resources that are available for you all. This will be in the email that I mentioned earlier, sent to you guys today. We have a good solutions brief, a white paper, and then a blog post that takes you step by step on deployment, just like what Oscar did right now. It's really great. It has screenshots, lays everything out for you. We'll have links to all of those for you guys to use. Also, what will be in your email is information on a breakfast training presentation that we're doing at Cisco Live. So if you're going to be at Cisco Live, this is going to be a great chance for you guys to come in, have some breakfast, meet us in person, ask us questions in person. We're going to be inviting attendees from Cisco Live, so there could be some potential prospects there, good networking. We're going to have a raffle also for an Amazon gift card. So we'll send that out with more information. It's going to be on Wednesday during Cisco Live at 7:30 a.m. at the Pendry Hotel. And would love to have you guys there. You guys can share this information with anyone. And as mentioned before, we will also have this recorded, so you guys will have that to share with people. All right, I think we are ready for questions now.
Okay, so rather than type in answers, we'll just read out the questions and we'll answer them as they come. So one of the questions that came up was the vCenter plugin, is it Flash or for the old traditional VMware Flash versus HTML5 GUIs? And the current NexentaStor vCenter plugin is an HTML5 plugin, and the simple reason for that is that VMware sees HTML5 as the kind of the way forward. So the vCenter plugin for NexentaStor is simply an HTML5 plugin. Somebody commented that it looks like we need a HyperFlex in our lab, and yes, we'd be happy to take one. So if anybody want to email me the contact details, joking aside, yes, it wouldn't be bad to have a HyperFlex access. We don't at the time. So another question that shows up here is if there's any plans to integrate this into Cisco Insight.
Okay. We're absolutely, open to take that. At this point, we need raise that request to your own product management side of the house, so that then we can engage with them to do this. Right. At this point, it's not in any plan on the Nexenta side, but we're open to support and make things simpler for your customers working with you.
Okay. The other question is, for the Cisco Field Labs, do you offer a no-cost version? So for NexentaStor, as a product, we have something that we call a community license that you could use. We also have try licenses, but if it's actually for true labs and Cisco field usage, I would recommend that you reach out to Ricardo, and we'll be happy to work on an NFR type license if it's a permanent installation.
We'll absolutely support you on that front. Just reach out. I think contacts are on the follow-up email.
Yeah, absolutely. So another question was, can you please provide the OVA download and so forth? Trust us, that's going to be in all the collateral that we send out. So the next thing after this webinar, we're going to send out an email including the OVA links and everything. So just watch out for that, and you'll have it easily accessible. And here we have a question.
Price, right?
Yeah, let's see here. Give me a second here. We'll read the whole question. It's a longer one. Okay, so the way I understand this is, and hopefully I understand this correctly. There's a question about how do we ensure that the VSA, if you have a multi-host environment or essentially multiple ESX servers and so forth, and we provide, and we start a VSA, share file systems out, how do we ensure that the VSA is kind of, sharing data through the closest path to clients? Essentially, if you have clients running on multiple servers out there, how do you make sure that you try to, have some affinity between the clients and the VSA? Depending on how your clients consume data, that can be hard or it can be easy. The way I would approach this is simply through all VMware tools. I would configure the VM proximity or affinity within vCenter to make sure that the clients have affinity to the same ESX server, for example, as the primary VSA. And then VMware controls all of that. And it would be all internal networking, so to speak, within the ESX server. Obviously, if you have an HA configuration and you have failures, that affinity might break up, but it would still be on the affinity configuration that you have in vCenter or the VMware ecosystem. Hopefully that answers the question correctly, and kind of I understood the question correctly. And another question is, if you have multiple VSAs, do they represent a single distributed namespace or are they separate namespaces? Great question. Every VSA is a completely separate namespace. That's actually, I call a feature because it actually allows you to do multi-tenancy pretty easily and actually make sure that, if you have multiple customers running in the same HyperFlex or multiple departments running in the same HyperFlex configuration, but they should never have access to the same data, you can very easily control that, and you can even delegate access rights to various groups within the different VSAs, and they can administrate those directly on their own. So, and then yeah, I think that was the last obvious question. So happy with that. If you guys have any additional questions after this webinar concludes, feel free to reach out. We're always happy to answer questions.
Yeah, I think that's it. Look out for that email today, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.